Right, welcome to the Oxygenaddict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you can perform at your best with 15% off your first order of electrolytes, carbohydrate, and fuel with the code OA23 at precisionfuelandhydration.com. So welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and I'm joined by co-host here, Chris Palfreyman. Chris, how are you doing, my friend? Let's fill everybody in. You've not been so well the last couple of weeks, have you? Bless you.
Hello, Rob. Hello, everyone. First off, before we start, I think I should apologize in case I end up coughing or sniffing or anything on the podcast. I'm on the way back from fairly long or medium-term illness. So I'm not going to fall into the trap of saying, hi, everyone, I'm very well. How are you? Because that's not the truth.
No, you're going through it, aren't you?
Yeah, I've been struggling. And to sum it up, it's been, I don't know how many weeks now, and I don't really want to think about it, but longer than I'd want. And it's been a long-term chest infection that I've really struggled to shake off. And I think it's quite important to talk about it sometimes.
Yeah.
And maybe this is the space, this is a time that we can do that. And I know that I'm not the only one, especially in our team, Team Oxygenaddict, that I'm not the only one going through a similar thing, whether it's a chest infection or similar. And it's really hard as athletes to know what to do next and what are the actual best steps forward. So yeah, I'm looking for a bit of guidance from you as well today, Rob.
Well, this is exactly what's led us into talking about this on the episode. I've got a whole bunch of episodes I want to talk to things about, but tons of our athletes outside of you are going through either illness, sickness, or injury at the moment. And it tends to be amongst athletes that when we're healthy and we can train and see other people and talk about our training, we feel as though we're part of a community. And when we're ill, because people don't talk about it as much or even at all, can feel very, very isolating. And it's easy to assume right now, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's easy to assume every other member of the team, every other person in the world is healthy right now. And it's just you that's sick and injured, right?
Yeah. And it's incredible when you're fit and healthy and training comes easily. When that's taken away from you, it feels as if you lose a part of you definitely lose part of your routine, but also identity and thoughts are very different. From the time you wake up, it's not about how can I make the steps to become the healthiest version of myself today. I'm going to go for my 45-minute run. I'm going to then eat really healthily. And then in the evening, I've got a bike. All of that's taken away. So suddenly you lose a lot of the structure to your day. And that's even without thinking of the long-term or medium-term racing plans that, vast majority of our athletes have incredibly ambitious goals this year. And it's really tough to get your head around X amount of days out of training and out of your routine. But I think hopefully by the end of this podcast, the listeners will be able to have a few kind of positive thoughts that are going to help the athlete get past this tricky stage and kind of stop that unraveling. And I was very close to that a few days ago, thinking, actually, I might as well start looking at races for 2024 and start mapping out what 2024 looks like. But that's not the case. Even though I'm going to miss X amount of weeks, which might turn into months of training, I've still got X amount of years of really solid training in my body, and I know how to get back on the horse, as it were. And so I think it's going to be, it's really tempting for athletes just to throw everything down and say, I'm ill for 2 weeks, which means 2023 is over. It's not. And hopefully we can delve into that a little bit, Rob.
Yeah. Mate, I think it's going to be hard in a way that you're currently personally going through it as well. But in some ways, it's also good if you don't mind being a guinea pig and a test case for this, because we'll get an honest view from you. I know we will, on how it currently feels, and it'll reflect how people do feel when they're ill or injured. And you're dead right. It's very easy to look at this and go, well, I haven't trained for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, so I've basically never trained ever in my whole life. There's no point thinking about racing this year. Really, we're in the middle of, as we record, we're in the middle of March, aren't we, right now? Even if you have another 4 weeks completely off training, in another 4 weeks of training after that, you can be back to where you were. And then you've got the whole summer to look forward to. So it can be very easy to catastrophize and think everything's useless. But hopefully we can talk about some strategies and things to mitigate the damage you can potentially do to yourself, both in terms of making health and fitness worse at the moment, but also ways you can minimize the impact on your fitness so that when you do come back to training, you're not, I don't know, a stone heavier than you were when you started. Not that that's necessarily the end of the world, but if we can minimize that kind of thing, it makes the return to training a little bit easier at the end of it, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think there's still a lot of stuff you can do to add value to your daily routine that come race day might make you a better and healthier and happier athlete. It's not just because we can't do the 45-minute run that's scheduled for today, doesn't mean that come race day we're going to do a worse half marathon or marathon. So there are definitely things that you can do. And funnily enough, a lot of the stuff I find that you can do isn't physical. It's going to be mental, because basically our vessel, our body, is out of action, and we need to do everything we can to wrap that in cotton wool. But our mind is still racing, and our mind can still bring a lot to the table. So if you can get your mind in the right space, then when your body allows it, I'd like to feel that you can become, or you can come back as a stronger, healthier athlete. Which is hard to think.
Well, you said an interesting thing a minute ago. You said usually we're trying to become the healthiest version of ourselves, and when our training gets taken away, all of a sudden it's hard to hold on to that. I think we can try even harder to be the healthiest version of ourselves. I think what most athletes are trying to do most of the time is be the fittest version of themselves. And it's easy to confuse fitness and health, but they're absolutely not the same thing. And so if we do hold on to the goal, or change the goal away from being the fittest version of yourself to being the healthiest version, maybe we can start to put together a plan during this episode where instead of the 45-minute run or the 2-hour bike ride you would have had in, what can we insert into that space that maximizes your chance of increasing your health? Now, for some people, it might be that going back to bed for a sleep for an hour that's scheduled into their training peaks is the kindest thing that they can do for themselves and their body in the recovery. And the reality is that what a lot of people, if not what most people will do, is work through that hour. They've found time, now they're not training, they've found time to do more work type stuff, or worry, or read on the internet about the latest aero helmets. So there are some things I think we can do to replace the training sessions that will help improve recovery and help improve rest, but they might not come as second nature to people. And I think people listen to this, they'll go, yeah, that's kind of obvious. I'll challenge people here. If you're thinking, yeah, that's kind of obvious, but you don't actually do it, you have to wonder whether or not it's obvious or not.
I think that's a really good point. And to give a bit of context from my experience, which I'm currently living, this is the second time in my adult life that I've gone to the doctors and been prescribed antibiotics. So I don't have a history of illness. It's not something that I'm I'm used to. And that in itself is already quite a big thing to get your mind over, because the first thing I did was, oh God, what did I do wrong? So I looked back at my last 3 to 6 weeks, and actually everything is perfectly logical. The amount of volume, the amount of intensity I was doing is very much in line with all our values that we have as coaches, and the progression rate is very logical and healthy. So I think that's kind of the first point that an athlete goes through is, and I think there could be learning there. If you feel that actually you look back at your last 3 to 6 weeks and you suddenly see a huge change in your training, so suddenly you're adding 50% in terms of volume, or even 40%, or even 30%. If it's an anomaly, it's probably not setting you up for the healthiest progression. And so I think just pressing pause and kind of self-analyzing that is the first step. Luckily, with the plans that we provide, we know that if you stick to that, and actually if you're consistent in sticking to the guidelines that we give, we know that it's going to be a very progressive, and I use the word healthy progression. So if you stick within those guidelines, you're in a pretty good state. But we know that a lot of the listeners are either self-coached or are using various different plans that they mix and match, which is absolutely fine. But please don't fall into the trap of thinking, I've got X amount of weeks to my event, so I'm going to see how the event feels today and suddenly go and run 20 miles, 30 miles, 6-hour bike. So I think that's the first stage. If everything is, I'm going to use the word logical in terms of the progression that your training plan is offering, then I think that is setting you up well to make sure that you're the healthiest version of yourself. So that was kind of my first phase. You know, in the first week of my illness, I was kind of looking to either blame someone or blame myself or blame something. But at the end of the day, the human body is very complex, and there are lots of viruses and lots of infections everywhere, and you can pick up anything at any time. And my time has come after 10 years of pretty serious training, and I've been very lucky to, you know, rarely have serious injury or illness, and here I am. So now I've got to find strategies to get over the next hurdle.
Yeah, I think you've said something really important there, which is sometimes you just get sick. You pick up a virus, you pick up bacteria, and you get ill because of that. There are times when you can possibly exacerbate the chance of that happening by being very run down and by being very overtired. And with endurance athletes, I think that's the danger. If you're balancing your training load well, then that shouldn't increase your risk of getting an illness or an injury. But if you are either a self-coached athlete who, I'm not going to lay this at the door of self-coached athletes, but often sitting down and planning out a training plan and making sure it's progressive and making sure that from week to week there aren't massive increases in volume, that's kind of a pressure release valve. You've checked across haven't done more than, I don't know, let's say the literature says a 10% volume increase a week, but I think a 20% volume increase, even if we go from 10 to 12 hours, it's not a massive red flag there for me. If you think 10% of a 60-minute run is only 6 minutes, isn't it? Well, I'd be comfortable with someone going from 60 minutes to 75 on a long run, or from going from 2 hours to 2 hours 30 on a long bike ride. So somewhere around that kind of area, I think is there's no red flags there. But the challenge comes when something hasn't gone to plan for a couple of weeks and an athlete's itching to get a long bike or a long ride done. And then there is a big jump, or someone goes away for a week's training camp, or frequently what happens is there's a weather window or even just an opportunity window up as to do some more training. And lo and behold, you've done an extra 4-hour ride, you've done an extra couple of runs, and the volume's jumped from 7 hours last week to 18 hours this week. That can have a very real and material impact on your, let's call it like the robustness of your ability to shake off a cold. And that's really the first level of this, isn't it? Avoiding picking something up if you can possibly avoid it. So I think the overtraining angle of it, whilst it's very real, it's very avoidable as well. So athletes shouldn't blame themselves if they pick up an illness. The main thing I think we've got to look at, and we'll go into here, is what happens when you get it and how can you minimize the time you're ill with it and kind of shorten the runway back to health as much as you possibly can. I think that's where we'll start with.
That sounds, like really good advice. So going on from that, what are the first steps, in your opinion, that you'd like our athletes to do at the first sign of whether it's a niggle or sore throat or just general fatigue? What would you expect one of our athletes to do?
Well, if we rewind it before we even talk about what to do when someone's begun to get sick, let's talk about what athletes can do in the perfect world to maximize their chance of staying healthy, because I think that's overlooked, isn't it? And it's the fundamental part. If we look at an athlete's day-to-day life and how can you maximize your chances of not getting sick, not getting ill, not getting injured, We've been working a lot recently to give a little bit of a framework to this, because I do like frameworks. We found some stuff courtesy of, now you might remember this guy, Dr. Anton Creek, we had on a couple of years ago now, and he's a really amazing diagnostician. Is that the phrase I'm looking for here? He's really good at diagnosing problems. That's his key skill area. And he turned me on to this thing called the SEEDS Journal, SEEDS. It's the work of a guy called Simon Marshall, PhD, who some people will know he's written a book, and he's the partner of Leslie Patterson, the Xterra world champion, who incidentally has just either been nominated for and or won Oscars recently as a film writer, which is pretty awesome. He has this little online portal called the SEEDS Journal, and the SEEDS stands for the 5 things that a person can do every day to take care of to maximize their ability to stay healthy. And they stand for, it's S for sleep, E for exercise, E for eating healthily, D for drinking, meaning drinking no alcohol, and the S is for stress reduction. So amongst those 5 things, I kind of think of them as the 5, almost like the pillars that are underpinning an athlete's ability to go out and train. And it's easy to overlook them, and it's easy to go, well, whatever, I'd go to sleep every night, it's fine. But when you start to look into the evidence for things like this, I encourage everyone to go out and Google the effect of sleep disruption on your ability to train and absorb training load. If you're getting less than 6 hours of sleep a night, it's almost certainly detrimental to your ability to absorb training load. It's a fascinating study that's out there. So as a rough rule of thumb, we'll just say you need 8 hours of sleep every night. We'll say that you need to get your exercise done every day. That's just a basic tenet of being healthy. And, for us, that's our training plan and how that all gets absorbed. So we'll put that on one side and come back to it. The next 2 things are really key: eating a healthy diet and drinking no alcohol. It's easy to sort of say, well, how do I know whether I'm eating a healthy diet or not? So my rough rule of thumb with this is, well, at the end of the day, have a look back and think to yourself, well, was that a decent diet day, including loads of fresh veg, loads of fresh fruit? Or was it the kind of day that, I don't know what your triggers are, mate, but for me, it might be that my son's left a bag of Haribo open on the counter. If I have one of those things, they're like crack to me. I'll hoover the whole bag of them up. If there's crisps out, I'll have 2 bags of crisps. I have a kind of switch that goes off inside me, like the junk food Cookie Monster, just hoovers this stuff up. And honestly, when I've looked at this in my own personal life, my days are pretty binary. They're either, it's been a pretty good standard day where I've eaten loads of healthy, fresh food, or usually in the evening, I've had a breakdown and I've hoovered up loads of crap. So is it a yes or no? Was it a healthy eating day or not? And if it's a not, that's fine. Move on to the next day and try and minimize that happening the next day. The alcohol thing, I think, is pretty unequivocal these days. Growing up for me, we were told we could have 21 units of alcohol a week and stay healthy. That's been reduced now to something like, is it 2 units a week or 4 units a week, maybe? It's basically 1 drink of alcohol a week you can have, and the doctors are not worried. For me, it's dead simple. Just don't drink. Reduce the amount of alcohol you can have as much as you possibly can. And if you're on special occasion, fine, whatever. You know me, I personally don't drink at all and haven't done for over a decade. But minimizing it is a really good way to help not sabotage yourself, because if you think my junk food breakdowns have an effect on your ability to train the next day, binging on beer, alcohol, wine, gin and tonic, whatever it is, has an even bigger one. And then the last one is stress reduction. We monitor HRV every day, and that's a really good way of monitoring. It's a really good proxy for how much overall stress your body is under. So again, it's not a marker of whether you're healthy or not. It's not a marker of whether you're going to get sick or whether you're well or not. It's a marker of how much physiological stress your body systems are experiencing right now. It might be that consciously we don't realize it. It might be consciously that we do realize it, but HRV is really good at showing up the stress that's hidden to us that we might not be willing to admit to ourselves that we're under. So if we're measuring the HRV for training app, if it's yellow or red, we can mitigate we can change our training to reduce the load at a time when our body isn't ready to accept either large volume or higher intensity training. So that's really simple. So there's those 5 things there. If athletes are taking care of those things on a day-by-day basis, then we can move forward into looking at everything else that goes on. But if someone's listening to this and going, yeah, whatever, I can't get more than 4 hours of sleep a night because I do X, Y, and Z for a job, well, something has to change there. Those 5 things are like fundamental, non-negotiable building blocks of your ability to train and absorb. And if you can't find a way to change them, there's big challenges going to be ahead for you in the short term as well as the medium and long term.
I found that really interesting, and I'm finding this quite soothing in a way. It feels like I'm listening to this podcast and it's actually really helping me listen to what you just said. And as you're talking, two bits kind of struck a chord with me. One is the HRV element, and I know as athletes we're always kind of driven towards data. We like to know physically, tangibly, what's going right and what's going wrong in terms of our training. And you hit it perfectly there, where you were saying that as athletes, we tend to be quite good at analyzing whether we have delayed onset of muscle soreness in our legs, for example, after a really long run or really hard gym session. We can wake up and we know, I'm feeling sore today, therefore I should probably adapt my training. Or you wake up and you just have that feel of deep fatigue, which could be from a whole host of different things. We're quite good at that, but there's this whole other kind of hidden data which can only be read from an external source, such as the HRV app. And that I find really interesting, that there's this whole kind of other aspect of my body that I can't read, and I can't do it through just how I feel. I might feel fine, but I've got to also remember that I've got 10 years of basically trying to disconnect my mind from my body, because during an Ironman, for example, the more the pain comes during the last part of the marathon run, I'm trying to tell my brain that this is fine, keep pushing, this is exactly what I wanted, go harder, go harder. And therefore I'm trying to create a void of pain is just information, you avoid it, you ignore it. Whereas actually during the day-to-day, in terms of coming back to a healthy lifestyle and health being our absolute priority, it's really important that we have the data points of not only are my legs sore, but also is my parasympathetic nervous system under stress. And if it is, you have to adapt the next few days. And the only way of doing that is from an app or from science actually telling you that. You can't just wake up and feel those things. So I think having that as kind of a guideline is really important, especially when you're under stress, whether it's at home, illness, or training itself. You have to keep an eye on it, and when it does flag up, you have to listen to it. You can't just look for those green days when you want the green days. When it's amber, when it's red, you still have to listen to it. And I think using it as a guideline is really important. And the amount of times you could be saving yourself a few days of illness or niggle just by lowering your intensity for the next 2 or 3 days, or the volume, can go an extremely long way in terms of building a long-term healthy season in your triathlon. And just the other point that you said, Rob, which I think is really interesting, is the concept of these pillars, the 5 pillars. And I think what's really interesting is if one of them are stressed or one of them aren't looked after, it has a huge effect, puts a lot of extra weight and pressure on the other one. And I think there's some really kind of easy examples that we've all lived through, which is you have 3 or 4 hours sleep for whatever reason. You know that the next day, in terms of your health choices, so whether it's food, because you're probably not going to do such a good healthy food shop, or you're not going to do as much prep work in terms of your meals, it's going to have a knock-on effect there, and then it's going to have another knock-on effect on the following night's sleep. Or you have 2 pints or 2 glasses of wine, that's probably going to affect your sleep, even if you don't think it is, it will do. And then therefore the next day is affected. So it's all of them are kind of, they have to be in harmony. And if you look after all 5, you're in a really good position to making it a long, healthy season. But if you start stressing one, I personally think that if one is stressed, you have to adapt the others. So if you start, if you have a few nights of drinking because it's a special celebration, then you have to allow more time for sleep, or you have to decrease the amount of exercise. And so you're always kind of balancing these plates, and you have to lower one to increase the other. And yeah, I'm finding that myself at the moment, that if I affect one, it's definitely having an effect on the other. So yeah, that's a really really good way that you put it there.
The other thing we've got to remember, I don't want to demonize alcohol here, because let's not lose sight of the fact that it's very good at what it does. And what it does is it helps people relax and de-stress. So if you're going to take that away from people, the reason that the de-stress activity is the next thing that's in there is you have to find something to replace it with. If you're a person who finds that a couple of glasses of wine or beers or whatever helps you to relax and unwind, if you take that away, you take the medicine away that gives you the effect it wants, you're still left with the challenge, which is, I'm overstressed. I need to find a way to de-stress. So that's where the de-stressing activities come in. I think whether it's Headspace app, meditation, yoga, Reiki, whatever it is that you can physically do, mentally do, socially do to help your body to recover. I just don't feel as though, or almost the point, it's a bit of a flag if the alcohol is the thing that you turn to in order to help deal with feelings of X, Y, and Z. It's the feelings that are the challenge there, and you've got to find another way around it. So again, it's easy to look at all this stuff and say, well, I'm not bothered about any of this. I'm going to get on with my normal life. I just want to hear about the training. But those 5 things we talked about, if you think about them like pillars that are supporting a building, if you pull one out, then the building's going to fall over. So they really are fundamental like that, I think. There was a podcast interview I listened to a couple of days ago with a guy called Matt Walker, I think his name is. If anyone knows him, I'd love to get him on the podcast. He's a sleep expert, and some of the facts he was saying about lack of sleep were astounding. Something like, if you've been awake for 20 hours, studies have shown you're as cognitively impaired as if you drunk 3 pints of alcohol and were over the limit to drive. It's amazing that, that hard data they've got these days to back up what we've always known, which is if you pull an all-nighter, you're useless the next day, and you're not going to recover well enough to absorb your training. But it's got to become a fundamental in athletes' minds, as much as training, as much as aerodynamics, as much as bike position, race wheels, race weight. How much sleep am I getting? So that's personally what I'm turning our thoughts to as a coach now. Is I'm doing I'll sort of do a reveal here. We're doing a little sample test with some of our small number of athletes at the moment at how we track this, how we score it, how we turn it into something measurable. And with all of the athletes we've done just 1 week of trials with at the moment, it's had a positive effect on all of them, simply because we've started, someone's looking over their shoulder and going, well, how much sleep did you get? Did you drink alcohol or not? Not that it's my job to tell people to drink or not, but you know what I mean? The fact it gets measured means it gets changed later on, I think.
Well, I think that's, it comes back to a healthier athlete is the fastest athlete, is the happiest athlete. And if you can look at training holistically, training isn't just the fact that you're doing your 45-minute run. Training is that you do your 45-minute run, but you're well fueled for it, you're well rested for it, you're well hydrated for it, and then you have the recovery time after that, and then you're setting up your next session. So there's a lot that goes under the word training and training plan. So yeah, the more that we can make tangible and actually measurable for our athletes, the better, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Right then, so I did a quick rewind there and talked about how we can effectively build health, stay healthy, the things to take care of to try and stay healthy. The next step, I think, is to go back to your original question, isn't it, really?
Yeah. So what would you advise, whether it's our athletes or a new listener, on the earliest signs of a symptom? And that could be illness, or it could be a physical niggle, or it could just be, what we call a general burnout, fatigue from stress. What would you like the athlete to take as a first step?
Well, I think let's keep it easy to start with and talk about, if we talk about someone who's woken up with a cold, that makes it kind of unequivocal, doesn't it? You're woken up with a cold, what should I do? Should I train or not? I've got a sniffy, runny nose. Maybe I've got a sore throat. I'm sneezing a lot. I feel rotten, but should I train? Later on in the day, I had a couple of paracetamol and I felt better. Should I get on the bike? That's typically the question that pops up in my inbox 3 or 4 times a day. So to make it really simple for athletes, I'm going to give credit here to a coach called Rob Harvey from Manchester Triathlete. Years ago, I was on a coaching course with him and he said this, and it's stuck with me ever since. He said, the basic thing to remember is it's the doctor's code of ethics. First, do no harm. And if you apply that same principle to yourself, you can't go far wrong, really. So if you've not been well, if you've got a runny nose, if you've got a cold, and the question is, should I train or not? Well, the answer is no. The answer is, if you're in doubt, then no, don't train. Don't do any more harm, because if we look at the 2 yous that split off at that point, the you who doesn't train, well, either you wake up tomorrow feeling great and everything's fine, and okay, you've missed a day of training, but it's not the end of the world. The you who trains when they are ill is going to get even more ill and is going to be out 3 to 5, maybe even 7 days. So the potential downside of training when you're not sure is much greater training if you're a bit ill than not training if you're a bit ill. So my advice is always this: totally rest until all the symptoms have gone, and then rest for 2 more days. So typically with a cold, by day 2 or day 3, certainly by day 3, the cold symptoms have almost entirely gone away and you're starting to feel fine. And my experience used to be, by the evening of the 3rd day, I'd think to myself, I'll just pull my running shoes on and maybe I'll just go for a jog. It was really hard to stop myself from doing that. Having this hard and fast rule that I can apply to people and say, no, from the day when you think to yourself, I'm sure that I could go and train today and be fine, 2 more days after that just gives you that wiggle room. And yes, it extends the time you're out of training from. But again, the downside of potentially coming back too early is another whole week, maybe another whole 10 days. Maybe your immune system gets opened up to something even worse and you end up having to have more time out. So it means you end up having maybe 5 days off with a cold. It isn't the end of the world. If you look at it like that, how many colds do you get in a year? Maybe people get 2, right? Maybe they get 3 in a year. So that's 3 5-day chunks out of training. You're not going to get any meaningful training done if you're trying to train with a cold anyway. So it's at absolute worst, you're on a flat level with the you who tried to train when you weren't well. And at best, you're protecting yourself from a 2-week or a 3-week period of suboptimal training as your body tries to recover from you trying to stress it. So I often find, Chris, that saying that to people gives them permission to rest. It feels true to them. It feels like, yeah, okay, that's the kind of thing that I should do that's sensible. But left to people's own devices, they won't do that. So coached athletes of ours are really happy to be told that, and they'll go, yeah, okay, I'm going to have the time off. I often meet people at coaching seminars or the British Triathlon stuff that I do. They talk me through what they've actually done, having heard me say it on the podcast. And sometimes they say, do you know what? I was really glad I heard you say that on the podcast, because I probably would have gone and trained, but I didn't do. And I think I did better overall because of it. If you're a person right now listening to this or watching this and you're thinking, yeah, I'm not sure what I should do, just take the time off. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself that ability to recover, because the chances are it's going to do you much more in the long run. It's the most compassionate thing I think that you can do for yourself.
That's really good, Rob. I've had a bit of a kind of breakthrough with the whole mentality of not being able to train, which was, I think I'm coming up to 3 weeks maybe now without training, and
yeah,
which is the longest in my adult life for sure.
And it's hard for a guy like you, isn't it? Who's never been ill. Like you said, did you say the anecdote on air earlier, or maybe you told me privately, that you went to the doctors and they didn't know who you were? Like you had no medical records because you've never been, right?
It's slightly embarrassing. Yeah, the only thing they had on my record was at the age of 12, I hurt my finger playing rugby, and they haven't seen me since. Yeah, they've had a few doctors come and go since then. And the breakthrough for me was that when I was training extremely consistently before this illness, I was always scared to take even one day off. An active day for me was a recovery day. So I'd go for an easy swim, an easy jog, whatever it might be. But now that I've had actually a totally enforced break, and there's no should I train or should I not train, because I've been put off by the doctor, and I'm in certainly no physical condition to go and train. But now I've got this kind of blank slate. I can look back and think all those times that I probably did go for that easy jog or that easy ride, I shouldn't have done that. And I can think of the amount of times that I've done it, because it feels like you're on this treadmill that I have to get this session done, otherwise I'm gonna suffer on race day. And it's just not the case at all. Even if you use the kind of timeline of a week, 5 to 7 days, if you take 5 to 7 days off at any point within your training, you're going to be fine. You're going to be okay, as long as it's for a reason that is with health at the heart of it. And so, I'm kind of at week 3 now, and I'm slowly but surely getting more and more confident that actually I'm quite excited about the challenge of getting back to full health and full fitness. Whereas if I'd taken 2 days off, a few months ago, I would have freaked out of, oh my God, is this my season over? But it's really, really not. And it's actually a very healthy perspective. And I'm finding a bit of clarity in the kind of timelines of, it's kind of the same anecdote of, you do one session, that one session isn't going to make you fitter. That's just one block within 100 blocks. And at the end of the month, you might hope to see an increase in aerobic fitness, for example. But if you take one of those out, you're not suddenly a worse athlete, or you're not unfitter. And it's the same thing with my health now. Just because I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks off training now, yeah, sure, it's going to take me a few weeks to get back to where I was. But there's absolutely nothing stopping me getting back to where I was, and even better, once I've allowed health to come back to 100%. And it's I see it really with clarity over the weekend, really, where each week I was still logging into Training Peaks and thinking, okay, I'll give myself another 72 hours, and then maybe I can go for that jog, and then I can do a ride. If those two go well, then I can do a 3-hour ride. Actually, it's that's totally fictitious, and that isn't with the objective of health at the heart. So now I'm completely offline in terms of my training calendar. I'm just not going to look at it. I'm not going to be looking at any of my metrics apart from HRV on a daily basis to see how that's evolving. And actually, I'm finding a kind of contentness, not with the fact that I can't train, because that's my absolute passion and it's really important to me, but I've got light at the end of the tunnel, that I know that I'm going to come back as the athlete that I was, and hopefully even better. And a few days off, even a few weeks off, is absolutely fine. And it's the first time that I've had that realization at the age of my mid-30s.
The use of the word block, I think, is really important. Think of it like a wall that you're building, and each session you put in as a brick. If you start putting bricks on the wall for a couple of weeks, the wall's still there. The wall's not going to fall down. Now, if you don't tend to your wall for 2 years, it's going to crumble away. But that wall is still there. And usually what we find with a guy like you, who's got really deep multi-season fitness, they have 3 weeks off because they're ill, 10 days back into training, they don't ever remember they were ill. It's about half the time post illness that you were out. If you're out for 3 weeks, 1.5 weeks of movement and training later, you feel back to normal. Now, you might find, especially a guy like you who races at the top end, you might find that you're missing just that little bit of sharpness at the very top end. But as a minimum here, you need to be stopping coughing before you even think about training. That's like the first marker, isn't it? That's a good sign that whatever has happened in your lungs has cleared, and the infection has gone away. Because ultimately, chest infections, I think, are one of the times athletes have got to be the most serious, because it's where all the hard work gets done in your body. If you're trying to force oxygen transfer across, I'm not the world's greatest physiologist, but I know that there's a membrane there that oxygen's got to cross through, and you've got bad stuff going on in the membranes of your lungs right now. It's not going to be helped by you trying to breathe 2, 3, 4 times per minute faster. So yeah, I think the major illness stuff that we'll talk about. We've talked about colds and stuff, but major illnesses, chest infections, flu, anything like that that is more serious than just a cold. First thing is to see the doctor and take the doctor's advice. If you get given antibiotics, you are not training until at least the course of antibiotics are finished. Again, this gives athletes something to hold on to because they don't have to think about it anymore. If you take a course of 7 days of antibiotics and you're still feeling awful at the end of it, then you need some more time off training. So that rule of 2 more extra days beyond the point where you want to go back to is a good pressure release valve there for not trying to come back too early.
Yeah, totally. I think as athletes, we've also got very short-term memories. So if you think now, if you're going through a similar thing to me where you can't train due to illness or injury, then think about the athlete you were 6 to 8 months ago. And to me, you know, I felt very fit. I was competing well, and I just can't relate to that right now. But that was me only 6 months ago. And so the same thought process can also happen looking 6 to 8 months ahead. And I know that I'm going to be in a very different position 8 months down the line. And anecdotally, I probably won't even remember how I felt right now. And I'll just think, oh yeah, I had that small gap in training, but how I came back was amazing. And now I feel absolutely fine. So don't just look at where you're in, you know, in this little microcosm of illness or injury right now. The timelines are very fluid, and 6 months ago you were an amazing athlete, and that doesn't mean that in 6 months time you can't be as well. So look forward with that kind of positive mindset, and you can start working towards that. And I've got a funny little anecdote when I was talking to the doctor. So she was talking to me about the antibiotics I'm going to be taking and the length of time and the dosage, all these things. And at the end of the consultation, she asked me if I had any more questions. And I said, yeah, from your experience, in how long will I be able to train twice a day, seriously, 6 days a week, month after month after month, without having any negative effects? And she just couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe it for a start that someone would be training twice a day, 6 days a week. That was a whole new world to this particular doctor. And just seeing her reaction made me realize, oh, okay, I shouldn't be approaching this whole process as an athlete. I should be approaching this process as a normal human trying to get back to health. My passion in life is training and racing, but that's on pause for now. At the moment, just don't be thinking about when I can get back to full training. And I'm just working towards the day that I can go for a 30-minute jog, knowing that that's benefiting my health as opposed to stressing my lungs to the point of opening a new virus or more illness. So at the moment, I'm not approaching anything as an athlete. I'm just, you know, looking for
trying to be a good patient. Hey,
yeah, trying to be a good patient and respecting my body, because the reaction that this doctor gave me kind of made me realize, oh, okay, it's not normal to be training that much basically every single day. So yeah, it's not such a bad thing to step back and kind of be a normal civilian for a few days.
Yeah, that guideline of, you know, for most people in the general population, doing 30 minutes of moderate exercise a day is fantastic for health. That gives you the kind of both the guideline and the cap on what a normal amount of exercise is for a human in the normal world. Everything above that isn't for health. Everything above that is for fitness and it's for performance. They're not always aligned with health. And if we look at we've only got to look at our very elite athletes to see often our fittest, fastest, most winning athletes are also the least healthy, unfortunately. So it's worth remembering this, that the exercise thing, the focus has to change during a time of illness to one of recovering health rather than the kind of stuff a guy like you would do to build fitness. Certainly isn't going to help you recover your health in the short term.
No. And it's hard. One thing that's really helped me, and I think I mentioned it earlier, is turning off all the metrics apart from the ones that are directly measuring health. So I don't need to know about my kind of equivalent of race ready or how my fitness is. I don't need to be seeing what my average hours were over the last month. All those things, they've just got to be put on pause and out the window. And once I'm given the all clear by the doctor and I've got confidence in my health and well-being again, that will be the point where I can turn all the metrics back on and not think, I would have been so much better if I hadn't missed all these weeks. It's more, okay, these are the cards I'm dealt with. This is day one. This is where I'm at. Just look forward about the building blocks that we've been talking about. So don't be comparing yourself to where you could have been, because that's just not reality. That's fictitious. Forget about it.
I'll tell you what might be useful then is your mindset works in a particular way. It's used to looking at training peaks, having a thing to do, ticking it off, turning it green, thumbs up and move on to the next thing. Set yourself some little goals that you can do, that you can tick off and you can turn green, but that will contribute to your health and recovery from this virus. So if we just go back to the 5 seeds goals there, you can easily add one in that says, try and have an afternoon nap and increase the amount of sleep you get. Or if you usually get 6 hours, try and get 7 hours. You can easily add something in about eating something extra nutritious. You can easily not, I'm sure you don't feel like drinking alcohol at the moment. Every little mark you can, maybe I'm wrong, yeah. Every mark you can give against one of those of the 5 pillars is a check mark. You can, that part of your brain that needs to turn something green on training peaks, it can do something to still be contributing to your improving health. It's not necessarily a 20-minute run or whatever, but it is just as effective at helping your brain focus on the thing it needs to do, which is, I need to get much healthier right now. And it might well stave off. I know in some instances I've worked with athletes who the lever's either up or down. And if they're training, they're fully healthy. If they're not training, the nutrition falls apart. They want to eat loads of cakes. They stay up late watching TV. The all or nothing mindset is very common. So learn what your mindset needs and work with it in a way that'll trick it into doing things that are positive for your health, essentially.
Yeah, I'm going to action that. That's really good. And I kind of have it in my mind, but actually putting it into a system, either on paper or equivalent of training peaks, I think does go a long way, especially when you start racking up week after week. You can see that you've been working towards something, and you've been working towards improving yourself physically, which is obviously incredibly important. I fell into the trap a few days ago, Rob, and you probably remember this. Sorry, we had a quick conversation and I fell into the trap of saying, hey, Coach Rob, give me some guidance. I'm really ill I'm on my 2nd round of antibiotics. The doctor's not happy with progression. But by the way, what do you think about my race calendar? Do you think a race in May is still realistic? And just the way you looked at me gave me the answer instantly, where you just laughed and you just basically in the nicest way possible saying, why are you talking about race calendars? Why are you talking about ambitious race goals when you've only got one goal at the moment, which is get back to health? It's not get back to full fitness, it's get back to health. Once that's in place, you can then start thinking about how to map out a calendar and adjust your goals. So that's where I fell into the trap of kind of keeping an eye on my progression or lack thereof on training peaks. And I was freaking out seeing race dates getting closer, knowing that my fitness is declining. And I kind of needed an SOS call with you to actually put me back on track and basically laugh at the concept of me.
Well, look, you've got a very goal-focused mind. And without a new goal to focus on, it's going to focus on the old goal, which is, can I win this race on this date? The minute you say, hey, brain, new goal, 8 hours of sleep, eat 4 lettuces, or whatever that may be, 30 different kinds of fruit and veg during the week. All of a sudden that is achievable. It's a challenge. I bet you'd have a hell of a time finding 30 different kinds of fruit and veg to eat during a week, but it is only going to give that part of your brain something else to focus on, which is great. So as long as we've just got to get all the horses pulling in the right direction, that's the key. And all of a sudden, the direction they've been heading in isn't the direction we want to go right now. We've got to head over this way for a bit.
Yeah, totally.
Listen, let's talk about the return to training a little bit, Chris. When you do get back to it, you brought this up earlier on. It's this idea of, well, I had a plan here and I left it on this date and I'm coming back to it 3 weeks on. And at this point, it was a 1 hour run and a 3 hour ride. And now it should be a 2 hour run and a 6 hour ride. do I just jump straight back into the plan in week one? What do I do? That's kind of and it's a real challenge for people who, we've sat back there and we've planned something out and all of a sudden it's had to change. So we need to help people understand how things need to change in order to get back on track, don't we?
Yeah, I think obviously the nuance is in what the illness was and also the cause of the illness, if there was one that's tangible, and also whether it was a niggle or an injury. So if you're talking about a run injury, that's probably very different to someone that's coming back from bronchitis or a different chest infection. So in my case, and I'd hope you agree, Rob, what I'm going to be doing with myself is I'm going to go right back to the start. So assuming that I'm going to have at least a month off of what I'd call training, I'm going to go back to as if I'm an athlete starting in January, and I'm going to go back to kind of square one once I've got full confidence in my health. And the way I'll know that is that I'll have a small transition window where I'll be looking to be active for 10 days to 2 weeks. And that will be all aerobic based, looking for consistency, doing little and often, and seeing how I bounce back in terms of recovery. If I get through that 2-week period, then I can kind of press go on what you'd call a progressive training plan that actually has goals and increases in stresses.
Totally.
And if that goes well for the first month, then I can then progress on to the next stage. But I think, even last week I would have fallen into the trap of, well, I think I can probably salvage it. If I can feel okay in the next 2 days, I'm just going to hop back on and I'm going to go full gas, 100%. Let's go. But we know that that's where things unravel.
Yeah.
So what would you say to our athletes as guidance on coming back from pause in training?
Okay, so slightly different guidance, whether it's a minor illness like a cold or a major illness like a chest infection, something like that. For the minor illness, usually half a week of easy stuff is enough to get people back on the on-ramp, and then they feel normal again and off they go. If it's been longer, it's anywhere from a week to 2 weeks worth of that on-ramp stuff. And just really, really generally, we're looking at like 2 or 3 days at 50% of your usual intensity with 15 to 30 minutes worth of exercise. And then if that goes okay, 2 to 3 days at about 75% of your usual intensity, 30 to 60 minutes worth of exercise. Now, none of this is rocket science. It's all taken from the studies that have been done in the Journal of Sports Sciences, where they just have this kind of on-ramp back to training. The key thing that I would say is a difference here is if we're talking about COVID, and I think we still have to talk about COVID, even though we're sort of beyond we're at the 3-year anniversary, actually, aren't we, of the lockdown starting pretty much. COVID is still a slightly different beast. So what we advise there is 7 total days off training for anyone who's symptomatic with COVID. I think if you're asymptomatic with COVID and you've ended up, and how people would know that these days, we don't do contact testing anymore and we don't do tracing. But for most people who contact me who've now got COVID, it's because they've been ill. And a repeating pattern here is they've thought they've had a cold, they've thought they've had a sore throat, they've tried to give it a couple of days off, something hasn't been quite right, and someone's mentioned almost as an afterthought, have you tested for COVID? And it's turned out that, they're COVID positive. So I'd give that flag to everyone. Yes, tests aren't free anymore, but they're only a few quid from the chemist. Hopefully it's not outside the realms of economics for almost all of our audience listening. I know it is for some people in general society, but if you've got a cold at the moment, if you've got a sore throat at the moment, test for COVID and see if that's what it is, because you need to know to protect the people around you, but also you need to protect yourself coming back from training. So rather than 1 to 2 days off training after symptoms, I'm advising 7 total days off training post symptoms, and then 7 days of really easy light training where you monitor what's going on, you look at your heart rate, you're super aware of like the horsemen of the post-COVID problems, which is really weird things going on with your breathing and really weird things going on with your heart rate. If either of those 2 things happen, straight to the doctor for a follow-up and you're stopping training immediately. If everything's okay with your return to training, fine, you do this week of easy training, another week of ramping back up, and essentially we're looking at a 3-week block there out of normal training. And in week 4, you're back into normal training again. But it's still really important, I think, to emphasize that for people, that the links between long-term issues that were going on for people with either breathing problems, microclots, possible weird heart things going on. Although, to put people's minds at rest, it looks like in the majority of cases, even if those things present as something as a serious cardiac problem would do, it looks as though in the majority of cases, it isn't that. From all of the reading that I've been doing, you still need to go and get tested and checked out. So typically, the small number of people who had this had really weird, massive jumps in heart rate when they weren't expecting it. It's a sign that something is going on with your heart and you need to get checked out. And if that's the issue, then you need to be stopping training straight away and putting pause on your ambitions to race, I think. But in every other situation, we're looking at a couple of days post-illness and then, sort of 2 to 5 days worth of on-ramp training again. And I'm just going to give one little shout out here for my little favorite for helping people to recover from the land of the hippies over here. Being out in nature really helps people recover. Sitting in front of a computer doesn't help people recover. If you get the chance, even if you can't walk, if you're not up to doing any kind of long walk, go out and find a bench and have a sit underneath the trees and just be out in nature for 30 minutes. Every single person I've made do this has felt better because of it. Do I have any evidence it helps? No. Can it be written in the scientific journal that it helps? Not that I'm aware of. Everybody who's tried it, it's helped. So turn off the computer for a bit, get out into nature and be out amongst the trees.
I'm a big advocate of that, Rob. It really does. And it's this kind of idea of disconnecting from online. So disconnect to reconnect is definitely something that helps. And just getting outside changes everything, changes the the environment, the oxygen that you get to take in. The other point that I think that's quite interesting and worth remembering as endurance athletes is that in terms of in basic terms, losses of fitness, usually the area of fitness that's going to decrease the quickest once you stop training is the top end zone. So your anaerobic system is the one that suffers the most. So if you're a 100-meter sprinter in athletics or short distance in swimming, running, all these areas, it would be really worrying to take a month off, and that would be a real red flag to the rest of your season. However, if you're an endurance athlete with a couple of seasons under your belt, if not longer, you're still in a very good position. Once you're back to full health and back to full training, your aerobic system is pretty well covered because you've already developed this huge engine, huge capacity within your heart and lungs to be stressed at a low intensity. The likelihood of you actually feeling, in inverted brackets, fit again after a few days of consistency is really high. So that's also something to kind of hang on to as an endurance athlete, is that, okay, my top end may be suffering a little bit. That's okay, that's natural. But at the end of the day, we're not sprinters, we're not anaerobic athletes. So let's keep the dream alive. That's at least what I'm doing.
That analogy from earlier of the building blocks going in, those building blocks for aerobic work are cemented in down at the bottom. Foundation. And it's the little seashells sitting on the top. That's the top end work that are going to get blown away. The wall isn't going anywhere. That's exactly right. Now, just before we wrap this up, I'm just gonna talk through a little bit around injuries for a bit of guidance for people, because it's really simple. Whenever you get any kind of soreness in your body, go and see a professional, go and see a physiotherapist, go and see a sports physio who understands your body. Try and build a relationship with a physiotherapist that gets to know you, because it's almost always the case that if you see a professional, they can give you some kind of advice that helps you feel better and some kind of prehab exercises that are going to solve the problem. Long-term problems can be avoided by going to see somebody early, but it's the prehab and the rehab work, the exercises that are going to cure the problem. It's not the going to see the physio that's going to cure the problem. And that's something that a lot of people struggle with over the years. I struggled with it as a young athlete. I thought that going to see the physio should magically cure me. I was really miffed when I had to go and do one-legged heel raises on the stairs every day, 5 times a day, to get rid of Achilles tendonitis. I felt as though somehow, having my calves rubbed by the physio should cure the problem. It's the prehab exercises and getting the right ones given to you that can work the magic. So go and see a professional. Be aware that often as triathletes, injuries can show up in one sport, but they might be caused in another sport. So typically we feel pain when running, and we assume that running is the cause of the injury. Sometimes it can be cycling that can be the cause of the injury. So I've often talked to people about Achilles problems being caused by worn bike cleats, for example, and you feel it when you go running. Your Achilles are incredibly sore when you run. The issue is that you need 14 pounds worth of new bike cleats from Wiggle. Once they're changed, it forms a really solid basis for your foot. As that cleat gets worn, your foot rocks from side to side and can niggle your Achilles, and you don't feel it on the bike. So just be aware that there are those little things that might happen where you feel in one sport. So it's not always the case that if it doesn't hurt, it's okay to do it. So be aware of that. But take the advice of a professional. Get into the habit of accepting if all of our best athletes have a physiotherapist or a sports therapist or a physical therapist they go and see on a weekly, monthly basis, it's okay for you to do that as well.
And it's an investment in terms of financially, it's an investment, but it's a very good investment towards your health. But I think as you approach that financial investment, also see it as a time investment. So the moment that you pay your physio is also the moment that you commit to yourself that over the next X period of months, you're actually going to commit to these specific exercises that they guide you towards. So yeah, definitely it's really hard to do, but if you are able to invest that time every morning, every evening during your exercises, it can change your whole season.
Yeah, 100%. Well, listen, that's brought us just about to the end of this episode. Before we go, Chris, I'm going to give a shout out for our sponsors, Precision Fuel and Hydration. If you go to precisionfuelandhydration.com, you can use their free online fuel and hydration planning tool, and you'll receive a personalized strategy for your next race. Essentially, what this is going to do is give you a lead for the kind of athlete you are, whether you're a very heavy sweater, a very salty sweater, and how much carbohydrate and electrolyte you therefore need for your body and for the events that you're going to be doing this season. It is a science. They can help you out just by filling out some click boxes on a screen, and it can give you a really good lead that can solve problems, especially for athletes who are going to be racing in very hot conditions or who are going to be racing for very long races like 70.3 and Ironman. So you can even book a free online one-to-one video consultation with the experts at Precision Fuel and Hydration. They're a great bunch of people. I absolutely love the company. They've been with us for 8 years now, and they've solved, I want to say, at least hundreds, possibly thousands of athletes' problems at 70.3 and iron distance, Chris. I think they're absolutely brilliant. And I love that they've moved out of just doing electrolytes into helping people with the carbohydrate and drink mixes as well. So you can use the code OA23 online to get 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel at precisionfuelandhydration.com. And just one last thing, if you're looking at the moment for help with your endurance training, whether that's triathlon, swim, run, marathon running, ultra runs, whatever it may be, I think we've got the best overall solution for coaching busy age groupers. There's a link in the show notes or a link on YouTube if you're watching there to book straight through to our calendars. We can have a chat with you for half an hour and work out what your biggest challenges are and how we might be able to help you solve them. We'd love you to have the best season ever. And if you've been listening to this and you're ill or injured at the moment, we want you to get well really quickly as well. So again, there's a link in the show notes that'll book straight through to our calendars, and we can have a chat with you about how we might be able to help you out. So links in the show notes and links underneath here on YouTube, so you don't have to remember them. Until next week, he's Coach Chris Palfreyman, and I'm Coach Rob Wilby. I nearly got the wrong name then. And you've been listening and watching to the Oxygenaddict podcast. We'll be back next week with more of this. Remember, you can contact us via email, the easiest way, help@oxygenaddict.com if you've got any questions from this show. So until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week, and we'll see you again soon. See ya.